All right, step one is making a plan. You need to make sure that you have your colors picked out. You need to get your paint called in if it's not called in for you already. You need to evaluate your site prep, what furniture needs to be moved, have the clients move the things that they're supposed to move. We're not responsible for small items, knickknacks, electronics, fabrics, and so forth. So we're just responsible for the larger items. You need to evaluate your substrate prep, whether you're doing wall sealing or trim, how much spackling needs to be done, how much sanding needs to be done, and then you need to get your workstation set up. All right, I got the workstation set up here and I'm going to go through everything needed to do a basic interior paint job. First of all, with color selection, we have a fan deck. We need that to help people choose colors. We have a little sample pipe for putting colors on the wall, and we have a throwaway chip brush for applying samples to the wall. Next, we move to prep work. We have lightweight spackle that we use for spackling holes, dings, dents. We have sanding sponges for sanding trim and walls. We have some caulk. We have blue tape, we have wide blue tape, and we have 1-inch blue tape. Roll plastic. We keep a box of Ziploc baggies for switch plates, hardware. This is a very important thing to keep in your vehicle. We've got plastic here. This is pre-taped plastic on a roll, and this makes plasticking really quick, really easy. It's a little more expensive, but well worth it. Dust mask for sanding. Bag of rags. Over here to production tools, I've got an assortment of brushes. I got a 3-inch, 2.5-inch, and then I got a 1-inch angled sash for getting in small spaces. I have a standard 5-in-1 knife. Every painter should have this in their pocket at all times. Brush comb for cleaning brushes out. I have a flexible putty knife for applying spackle. This is a sanding head and screens. Put this on a pole and we sand the walls with it. Gloves, if you're doing staining or anything messy, you can throw these cheap gloves on and save you a bunch of cleanup. I have, you always need a razor knife with you for cutting plastic. These snap-off knives are great because they keep a fresh sharp blade easily. I always keep a pocket knife in my pocket. Weenie roller for getting into small spots. We got a cut pot here for applying paint with a brush. We've got our tarps to protect the floor. We've got a 5-gallon bucket and a roller grid. This is a standard 9-inch setup that people have used for years. We've also got a 9-inch roller pan here with liners. I find the liners are well worth the money because they make cleanup super fast at the end of the day. We've got some 9-inch roller covers. What's missing is the 9-inch frame that we'll need to get before this project starts. And step ladder. You usually need a ladder to get up to the top of walls and stuff for cut-in. So I think that pretty much covers everything that we need for an interior paint job. Keep in mind, everything here combined is literally $367. Painting tools are very expensive. They're not cheap things, so they need to be cleaned and they need to be taken care of properly. If you take good care of a brush or a roller pan or a ladder, it will literally last you 20 plus years. So just keep that in mind when using these tools. Proper tool maintenance and cleaning is very important. Okay, so the first thing you want to do on a job is protect the client's furniture and floors. So you can see that we've grouped all the furniture to the middle. We've covered it with plastic. We've got tarps on the floors. We've only got 2 tarps on this job, so we'll have to work our way around the room with the tarps. We drop plastic over the mantle where they have all their stuff because we don't want to get dust all over it. We will be sanding, there will be dust, so not just for paint splatters, but we also want to cover things for dust purposes. Once the client's furniture is protected and your workstation is set up and you're ready for work, the number one thing you want to do is get your spackle on the walls first before you take off switch plates or do anything else. The spackle needs to dry and it's going to hold you up later if you don't get it on now. You do not want to wait to put the spackle on till right before you're ready to paint, because then you're going to be waiting for the spackle to dry. Okay, so now I'm spackling walls. First thing I want to do is look for anything that's protruding out. and scrape that off with my putty knife. Get that stuff nice and clean. And then I'm looking for holes, nail holes, dings, dents, gouges, anything like that. I've got my lightweight spackle here. I've got my flexible putty knife. So I'm gonna get a little bit of that on there. I'm gonna push it in there. You wanna go over at least twice to make sure that the cavity is nice and full. More shallow holes, you can just apply it and scrape it off flush. Larger holes, you may need to build it up and mound it up a little bit and then come back and sand it off. But it's a pretty simple concept. With spackling is something you have to do a lot of. You could come into a room and maybe have to spackle 100 holes. So it's something that needs to be done. You need to learn to be fast with it. You can't spend all day spackling walls or it's just gonna eat up too much time. So you need to learn to do it right, but then learn to do it quickly. Now we always tell our clients when they're pulling stuff off of the walls, if you wanna hang your picture back in the same spot, leave the nail. A lot of times it's a big pain to go remeasure everything where you want it. If you want the hole filled, pull the nail, and our guys will know that those holes need to be filled.
Go.
Now sometimes with larger holes, you need to mound your spackle up a little bit so that it can be sanded down flush because the spackle will shrink ever so slightly. So the way you do that is you come across there and then go the second direction. So you make sure you get that hole nice and filled and then leave a small layer over the top. And then you come back and wipe off all the excess just like this. All right, now that the walls are spackled and drying, the next thing is to take off switch plates and HVAC grills. You always want to have a box of Ziploc baggies with you. Any kind of your switch plates, any kind of window hardware, door hardware, screws, or anything like that. They tend to get lost if you don't keep them in a Ziploc baggie. Okay guys, a little trick here. It's always a real pain in the butt when you lose screws and hardware. You're at the end of the job, you're trying to put everything back together, you can't find them, they've been lost, you gotta go to the store, you can't find the right screw. Big headache for everybody. So a little trick right here. These are the screws for the HVAC grill. I'll put a little piece of tape right here over the head. This keeps them firmly in place. They're with the proper grill. They don't go into a bag and get mixed up with other screws. And you can just store them just like that so they're ready to go when you reinstall. All right, so what you see here is some cracks in the baseboard. So we're gonna wanna caulk those cracks up before we start the paint job. We want to do that pretty early in the prep process so it can be drying so that we can tape onto it later when we're ready to paint the walls. I've got some Alex Plus right here. I just have this in a squeeze tube because we just have just a little bit of caulking that we're going to do. Generally, a professional is going to have a caulk gun and a larger tube. All right, for little gaps like this, I've just cut an angle here on the caulk tube with a pretty small hole because we just have small gaps to fill. We don't want to put on more caulk than necessary and make a big mess. So I'm just gonna run this across here, like so. Got my wet rag. I'll run my finger right across that. Fill that gap in. Got a little spot right here where I need a little bit more. That's okay. Come here and grab that. Now when we tape that off and we paint the walls and we pull our tape, we'll have a nice straight clean line there with no cracks behind it. All right, now that we have our walls prepped and all of our gaps caulked up, it's time to take things off. We like to tape off the sides of the casings and we like to tape off the tops of the baseboards. This does two things for us. It gives us nice, clean, straight, professional lines. And as far as the baseboard goes, it keeps the roller splatter from getting onto the baseboard. Okay, when taping to start off, you need to make sure you have a dust brush on you. Most painters just have an old beat up brush that they'll keep in their pocket just to dust things off and clean them off. Remember, your tape is not going to stick good to a dirty surface. Then you'll get paint that'll seep back behind it, and it'll mess your lines up. So make sure you dust everything out good, especially the tops of the baseboards. You want to have your 5-in-1 with you after you apply your tape. You're going to want to seal that edge in. So the last painter did a pretty good job. They have pretty straight lines to go off of. My general rule that I train my painters is to always back your tape off of the corner or the old paint line about 1/16 of an inch. You never want to tape fully into the corner because that tends to make the paint want to peel from that corner when you pull tape. And also the thing is, corners often aren't straight. So you really want to make your own straight line. See how I've got a nice thin 1/16 of an inch gap right here? And I know that when I apply my paint to that, after it dries, when I pull my tape, and you'll notice like I'm using my hands right here to guide this tape in and out to make it lay where I want. And then I come through and I touch that tape with my other finger and I lightly seal it in. I don't follow the other painter's line. I make my own. Now I can see by this thin white strip that I left, that's going to be a nice straight line. So now it's time I take my 5-in-1 and I want to lightly burn the edge of that tape in. So that means I'm going to put my knife against the tape with this edge. I'm going to lightly tilt my knife out a little bit like that. We don't want our knife like this because then we're not sealing the edge. So we want that corner right there against that edge. And we're just going to seal that in firmly, but not so hard that you rip the tape. That's a key step that keeps the paint from bleeding behind the tape, and it gives you a professional looking line. All right, now we're taping off the baseboards. A really important thing to remember is that walls are wavy. So our goal isn't really to follow the wall with our tape line because that'll give us a wavy tape line. When baseboard goes up, the walls wave in, you can see there's little gaps behind the baseboard. We don't want to follow that wave. We want to follow the back edge of the baseboard itself. That's going to be the straightest line that we can follow. Sometimes with these smaller lips, you really got to take your time. You can also see this baseboard. This is an apartment, so this baseboard's kind of old and crusty. It's a really thin lip, hard to tape to. Now I'm going to show you guys how to make a nice corner here. All right, as we've come to the end, I've pulled the tape off of the roll. I get it stuck as close as I can. I take my 5-in-1, I push the tape into the corner, sealing it down. I press it firmly into that, and then I pop my tape off. I'll come in on that. See how straight that corner is? That's what a painter's goal is to have straight 45-degree corners where their paint lines meet, not curves. Now sometimes when you're working with these baseboards with a really thin lip, you don't have a lot of surface to stick to. So it's okay to burn it in more than once just to make sure that that paint doesn't bleed through. All right, so I'm going to show you how to do this casing here. I've already pulled my tape. That's the proper length. You want to make sure you got more than enough. Start up here on this corner. I'm going to hold this firmly. See how wonky that line is? Watch me straighten it up here. So I'm going to come out to that furthest point of the wonkiness. I'm going to come down. Now you guys got to remember, anytime you're placing your tape over the old color, when you pull that tape after you're done, you're going to see that on the trim. So if you got gray walls and you tape it off and some of your tape kind of slides over onto the gray paint, when you paint your walls red and you think it all looks nice and beautiful, when you go to pull your tape, you see that thin red pinstripe on your trim all the way around everything because you didn't put your tape in the right spot. Now, just like with the baseboard, once you get down to the bottom, you use your knife to go ahead and push that tape on into the corner lightly. And then I just go ahead and take that excess and I just stick it right there. Now come in close on that corner. See how sharp that is? Now come on up and see how I made this white line nice and straight, much straighter than the other paint. And then we burn it in. Again, especially if you're using a brand new knife like I'm using, if somebody's got an old putty knife or a 5-1 they've been using for a while, corners aren't so sharp, but using a brand new knife, you don't want to burn it too hard because you can cut your tape up, but you don't want to burn it too light. And never be afraid to burn it in a couple times. These lines should be beautiful when we get done painting the walls and we pull all the tape. So I just want to show you guys one more time how to get a nice clean corner on these baseboards when you're in a tight little spot. So you'll notice I left a bunch of excess right here, and then I'm going to get my tape line up as close as I can. My finger, lift this up a little bit. I'm going to use my putty knife right here. Got this tape right here in between my fingers. I'm going to push this in a little lightly, find that corner. I'm going to go ahead and burn it in. And then now you can come on in here. You can see that's a nice, sharp, clean 45-degree corner. And when we pull tape, even though it looks pretty bad right now, when we pull tape on that, that'll look nice and clean. Okay, this is a good example of a spot that we have some pretty bad blowouts onto the casing from the previous paint job. I want you to watch how I tape this. I'm going to come out here to the furthest point of bad. That's where I'm going to stick it. And then I'm going to work my tape in and out to where it comes out just far enough to cover all that old paint. Come on down. I just focus mainly on this top part here. Now, as you can see, rather than taping into the corner where all this goulash is, I brought my tape line out here to the edge of the bad stuff, and now I'm relying on my piece of tape, which is going to put a beautifully straight line right here on the side of this casing. You know, in situations like this where the old paint job's really bad, you can bring your tape way out onto the casing if you need to. And as long as you put a nice straight dialed line in there, it's not even hardly noticeable. It just looks nice and clean. All right, we're over here. Again, we're working in an old rental apartment, so we're seeing some pretty bad stuff. So I'm showing you guys some really cool magic tricks to make old cruddy stuff look nice and clean and professional with just a little bit of know-how. So you can see how we've got extreme blowout right here onto these cabinets, and that just looks really bad. I call that goulash. So watch what I do with my tape here. Again, I'm gonna leave a big tag piece right here so I can rip that off later with a putty knife. I'm gonna come out here to this widest point. Okay, I'm gonna leave this stuck up here just for a second. Get this where I want it. Now, we'll have to make a compromise here. I really don't wanna make the whole line quite that wide, so I am going to taper it in a little bit. We're going to go from that wide, nasty point all the way down here. It's not something we usually love to do, but in extreme situations like this, it's gonna look much better when we're done. Make sure we keep our tape out far enough, cover all the bad stuff. And you know, this is a rental property, so we're not gonna overthink this too much. This isn't a mansion. So we're gonna take this up into the corner here, pull that off nice and clean. Now, again, look at that. Coming out here with my tape. Give yourself plenty of excess. Don't short yourself with tape. I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna make a line that's pretty low. Okay, I'm gonna stick it right here at that lowest point. Taper it up slightly. I'm gonna taper it up over here. Burn that in really good. Bring this stuff down. Get into that corner. I'm applying pretty good pressure with my finger. I'm gonna back my putty knife off a little bit with the existing tape so I don't overlap over here too far. Now, see what I don't like right here? See this little spot? I'm gonna remedy that with this little piece of tape that I just pulled off. I'm gonna go up here to this point, the high point, and I'm gonna taper that line down just a little bit so it looks a little cleaner. Now again, guys, this isn't gonna look amazing. Taper this up a little bit so we're not so far down in the corner. But what it's gonna do is it's gonna greatly improve the way this looks. So another pro tip that I got for you guys, we don't tape off the tops of the casing because that's a line that you don't see. But what you want to make sure that you do is as you're going along taping everything, you want to make sure that you dust off. See all that? You want to make sure you dust off the top of that casing, because what you don't want to do is get to painting and doing your thing and then you get to the top of the casing and you're not paying attention and then drag a bunch of dirt off into your paintbrush. Obviously it's a flat ledge, so lots of dust will be sitting on top of this. So make sure you get that taken care of during your prep process. So I just want to make my point about the dusty ledges. Check this out. Look how dirty that is up there. And the person that was taping, they taped down over here, and obviously this tape is just not stuck at all. See all this dirt right here? So you just want to make sure during the prep process, you come through with a dust brush and get all that crap off of there before you start painting, because you don't want to deal with it after you have wet paint on the walls. Okay, we ran into something here that happens from time to time on jobs. This is a real painter headache. Somebody has taken and applied silicone to the top of the baseboard here. I'm not sure why they did this, but paint will not stick to silicone. So that's going to be kind of an issue. Not a whole heck of a lot we can do about it, other than cut it all out and sand it down and then re-caulk those areas. So just if you run into that, and you can tell because it's really shiny and it feels rubbery. So you know when it's silicone as opposed to a clear paintable caulk. So just keep an eye out for that. Something else I like to do is when we have accent colors and we have two colors meeting in the same corner, you can kind of come in and see this line here, how kind of wonky and wavy that is. I'm gonna go ahead and tape this off. This is old paint, so it's plenty cured to tape onto, and I don't really have to worry about it. Sometimes when you're putting the same colors on in the same day, you don't have this option because the paint's too fresh to tape to. So in situations like that, you just have to freehand cut it in and kind of use your artistry. Now let me show you how this works. So this is just the same as with the trim. It really doesn't matter, you know, within reason, how far out onto the other wall you come. You have to cover all the old color, or not cover it actually. You actually have to make sure your tape is far enough that your new paint covers. And you can see how wavy that line is against my nice straight tape line. right, now that we have all the walls spackled, switch plates off, everything's covered, everything's taped off, the final step before painting walls is sanding the walls. This is often an overlooked step in the process, but it's crucial, it's vital to get a nice, smooth finish on your walls and for everything to look professionally done. Now, what I've got here is just an old school pole sander. It's got a sanding head. I've got a screen on here, 120 grit, and I've got just a standard roller pole. This screws right on here. There's other options better than this. There are the 360-degree head sanders, which work much better than these. And also we have power sanders. When walls are in really bad shape, sometimes you need something that's a little bit more aggressive to get all the boogers and all the bad spots out of the walls. So we have actual power sanders with hoses that attach to dust extraction units so that we could really come in and really sand walls really well, get things nice and smooth, but it eliminates all the dust. Now I want to show you an example of, you can see these walls are in really bad shape. There's a lot of bumps, a lot of boogers, a lot of really ugly roller stipple. This is an apartment. It's had many, many, many bad paint jobs on it. So I'll show you guys how to use this pole sander effectively. So usually you can do the top half if you want first. And then do the bottom half. See all these white specks here? Those are all bumps and boogers and bad spots that I've actually sanded out of the wall. And see this example right here? This is some spackle that was put on, never sanded, and it got painted over. Now that'll be nice and smooth when we paint the walls. You won't see that anymore. Now the other method is just straight top to bottom. Probably the most efficient. So what's really important about sanding or doing anything when you're painting is to be very system and process driven. So you don't want to do what I just did in the example, is start in the middle of the wall and kind of jump around all over the place. You want to start on a corner, you want to sand a whole wall, sand the next wall, sand the next wall, and just work in an orderly fashion so that you don't miss stuff and skip stuff. So it would look something like this. You could really see a lot of that bad stuff coming off. So I can flip this roller head sideways. And if we get into those corners, you can slide sideways if you want. That works better for you in certain situations. Sand around this box. Fortunately, we have power tools now. There was a time when I had employees that sanded entire houses with a pole sander. And would just do whole rows of houses day after day sanding this. So be lucky we don't have to do it this way anymore. Okay, so what happens with these sanding screens sometimes, now I haven't sanded enough for that to happen just yet, but sometimes this stuff will start to build up on the sanding screen. And when you start getting mounds of paint that are built up on the sanding screen isn't hitting the wall flush and you're not sanding effectively. So every now and then you have to stop, take your 5-in-1 knife and work all those chunks off of it. Like I said, I don't have any on right now, but that would be the process for that. You just don't want to be doing a bunch of sanding for no reason. Now you can see I've sanded the heck out of this wall with this pole sander, just from all the white spots. That's just chunks and bumps and stuff that I've knocked off. A little painter trick. Generally when we're painting walls, we use a 1/2 inch nap roller cover because it puts on a pretty smooth finish with a pretty light stipple. When you have walls that are in really bad shape, like these apartment walls, if you use a thicker nap roller cover, like a 3/4, and even in extreme situations, a 1 inch, and roll your walls with a nice even coat with that thick nap, it'll create a heavier stipple, but at least it'll be an even stipple and it'll help hide and smooth out a lot of imperfections. All right guys, we went and had a little lunch after we had the entire area prepped out. So a couple quick notes about that. First thing I did when I got back from lunch was I tidied up my work area. Things get strung out throughout the day as you're getting stuff done. We're ready to start a new stage of the job. So I went around and collected all the tools, picked up all the tape, all the trash, tidied up my work area so everything looks nice and clean and I can get a fresh start after lunch. The other thing that I did at lunch was I forgot 2 things when getting ready for this job, which is going to happen. Even the best painter is going to forget stuff sometimes. What's important to note about that, I forgot to get a 5-gallon bucket liner and I forgot to get a roller frame. And what's important to note about that is I didn't stop in the morning and go get this stuff, or I didn't come back from lunch, realize an hour later that I needed it, and then have to go back to the paint store again. As I was working throughout the morning doing my prep work, I made note of the things that were missing. I put it down on a list. I didn't try to just remember it. And then when I went to lunch, I popped into Sherwin-Williams. Took me 5 minutes to pick up the things that I needed, and then I got on back to the job. So it didn't end up being an hour round trip and a bunch of wasted time to get the things that I forgot. That's called good pre-planning. Okay, we got all our prep work done. It's time to start painting. The first part of doing walls is the cut-in. So I got us a cut pot here, just a handy little paint pail. I've got a liner, like I said earlier. Anymore, I like to use these liners for everything. They're really cheap. They make cleanup quick and easy, and so I always encourage my guys to use these things. Just pop it in there real quick. I've got some Promar 200 paint right here. One thing to note, a good painter won't pour from the front and get paint all over the label. Later on, you may need to know what paint this is, what sheen this is, what brand this is. Even 2 years later, if you're coming over to do touch-ups at a job, you want to be able to identify your paint. And even more importantly, you want to be able to identify this top label up here. This label has your color number, it's got the formula, it's got the color. So try to keep paint off of that as well, so it's easy to figure out what you have later. So what you want to do is you want to pour from the back. Use your 5-in-1 knife, pop this lid off. Pour from the back. You only want a couple inches of paint. Get a little bit in there, jiggle it off, and then pop it back like that. Then you already have your brush out of the shuck, ready to go, so you can catch these drips. And you just brush that excess paint off the side of the can like so. And this part's really important. Come over here. When you pour up paint, you fill this trough with paint. If you got to put your lid back on here like that, and then you pop your lid down with a hammer or whatever, you're going to splatter paint all over the place and make a big mess. So you take your brush and you just work it around like that. Do it from this side so you can see it. Just work it around like that. And you push that paint back up into the can. Just do this a couple times. Now, as you can see, there's no paint in that trough. I can put the lid on, tap it down a little bit, and I'm not splattering paint everywhere. You never want to dip your brush more than halfway down. You don't want it dipped down to the ferrule. You don't want paint all over your brush. You don't want it dripping and globbing. You want to try to be really clean. So I only put a couple inches of paint in, no further than you really want your brush dipped. And a really good habit to start is always tapping your brush off on the same side if you can. So when you dip, you're going to tap and you're going to tap. And that's going to load up the right amount of paint on there for you to do your cut in. But if you can continue to tap on the same side, that allows you to put your paintbrush in to go do whatever, and you can come back and you don't get paint all over it, getting paint all over your hands and just generally making a mess. A good painter is a clean painter. A good professional painter can apply paint all day long in most situations and get little to no paint on themselves, keeping their clothes clean, keeping their job site clean, without working extremely slow either. But it's just about creating good habits from the very beginning, just like patting your cut pot on the same side every time. All right, we're getting ready to cut in this room. Generally, if you have two people working on a room like this, you'll have someone doing top cut, someone doing bottom cut. You'll generally have your more skilled person doing the top cut. They're working off a ladder. They have to freehand, perfectly straight line to the ceiling. They're not using any tape. So that is going to be your more skilled painter. Your lower skilled painter can work on the low cut, which is everything that can be reached from the ground, outlets, around vents, everything over the baseboard and beside the casing. Your top cut guy is going to bring things down in corners in places far enough for the bottom cut guy to reach from the ground. Now, as the bottom cut guy, I can move pretty fast. That doesn't mean I want to hammer the tape excessively and force paint up underneath it, but I can definitely get paint up on the tape and I can move quickly. Also, it's also an opportunity for you to practice your freehanding, because eventually you want to be able to do the top cut. So learning how to cut into that tape pretty cleanly while still moving quickly, this is a great opportunity to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and cut this little section in for you guys to show you what it looks like. All right, I'm going to show you guys how to do bottom cut. Very important to make sure that you have a tarp underneath you at all times when you're painting so you don't get any paint on the floor. Make sure you're always keeping it pushed tightly up against the baseboards too. So. When you get to areas like this, the reason I'm going slow and kind of cutting in clean is because this vent is full of cobwebs that we probably should have cleaned out before we got started. And I'm definitely going to be careful not to drag my paintbrush up into all that junk, because that will obviously transfer to the wall, making a finish that isn't perfectly smooth. Getting great coverage out of this Promore 200 paint. Going over a dark gray with kind of a light yellow, where you can see the first coat is going on really well. With good paint and a good paintbrush, you don't have to dip as often and you can get better production. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this in for the roll guy because it'll just make it a little bit cleaner. We don't have to worry about him causing a bunch of drips on this thing. So there you go, that's bottom cut area on this wall. Everything I can reach from the top, from the bottom. Top cut guy should take care of the rest of this stuff. Okay, I'm getting ready to show you guys how to do top cut. Pretty simple concept. You're doing all the cutting in from the wall to the ceiling, the tops of the doors, and any soffits or stuff that the guys can't reach from the bottom. So this is one of one of the real skills of a painter. You know, a really top painter can draw a really nice straight line, but don't be intimidated by it. If you practice enough, you can get really good at this fairly quickly. You'll learn to manipulate the brush in your hand in different ways depending on what positions you're working on. I'm going to start here on this corner. You can kind of see how wonky this line is here. You can see I'm holding my brush kind of like a pencil. Thumb there. My main support is these two fingers here. This one up here kind of helps guide. You want to keep your brush pretty loaded with paint. You don't want to scrape it off. You scraped all your paint off. Now you're working in, you know, much shorter runs. You want your paint loaded up so it flows easily and quickly, and so it flows further, and that gives you much better production. So I'm gonna see if I can straighten this line up a little bit. You'll want to, let me show you down here. You lay your brush like this, you spread it out, and you use those upper tips up there to draw your line. So I'll show you how I do this up here. I'm going to smooth that out a little bit, and then I'm going to come back the other direction. I'm going to straighten it a little bit more. Now I'm going to make sure that I'm covering up. Oh, there goes a drip, so we got tarps down. Make sure I'm covering up all that dark gray. Then I'll come back and I'll stroke it nice and smooth. Catch that drip right here. That's pretty much how it's done. All right, I'm continuing to cut this wall in. When you're moving your ladder, you're moving in a way that you have to reach back to where you started, and you can get pretty far over here. So try to move your ladder like intelligently, so you're having to move it as little as possible. So I'm gonna have to stretch out a little bit to get this started. I tell you guys, this is an old apartment. These corners are not straight. This popcorn is not easy to cut to. And this is just going to be a line that's really hard to get perfect. What we do have working for us is our wall color is a pretty light color. So it blends with the white pretty well. And you're not going to see imperfections nearly as much as in when you're cutting this dark gray into a light ceiling. So I think you can already see how much cleaner that looks. And then as I go along, I'll also cut in above these doorways. Now a professional painter is not going to hammer the tops of this casing with paint, even though they're not going to be seen. You still want to do a pretty good job of cutting that in. And like we talked about earlier, before you cut that in, you want to make sure there's not a bunch of dust on top of that piece of casing that it'll drag up into your brush. I'm just going to continue. Now see how far I was able to cut in with one dip, because I'm loading my brush up with paint, and I'm also using a good brush that'll hold paint. And I'll come back in this direction personally and just dial that in one more time, kind of just clean it up. And we're not going to overthink this one because it's an apartment that's in pretty bad shape already. A pretty rough corner right here. You can see there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. I want to show you how I'm going to try to straighten this up a little bit, get my excess off, force those bristles right up into that corner. See that? And then I'm going to pull it out this way, hide all that stuff. Then I'm gonna go back over here on the other side, mash those bristles up in there just like that. And then I can come over here and just pull that out. I'm gonna have to come way out to cover up all that brown right there. But as you can see, compared to what that looked like when we started, that is pretty clean. So I'm doing my cut in. I noticed something that we forgot during the prep process, and that was covering the top of this thermostat right here. So this is one of those little things, kind of pet peeve of mine. Guys like to skip stuff like this, and then they get paint speckles all over the top of it when they roll, and then the customers call me a week later having us come clean this off. So rather than just going forward and allowing someone to come and roll and get paint all over this, I stopped what I was doing. I got some tape, and I came over here and I covered this thermostat like it's supposed to be done. So make sure anything that you're rolling over the top of is taped and covered so it doesn't get speckled. So I want to show you guys a quick tip on how to deal with, well, we got some really shaggy carpet here, which, you know, I could cut this in by hand if I wanted, but you know, you see that's like all up on the wall. I'm gonna pull a little tape off right here. I'm actually gonna put some tape onto this carpet, wrap it around kind of tight, maybe bring it down onto that wood a little bit. I'll take my putty knife and kind of take it down a little bit. Now you still have to be very careful here. You can't just hammer that tape. You still have to cut it in, but at least that gets the shaggy parts of the carpet out of your way. You definitely do not want your brush very loaded up, so I'm gonna pull all the extra paint out of my brush for this. And then I come in here and I still need to cut it in as if the tape's not there. And then when you pull this tape at the end of the job, the fabrics can come back up, paint's all behind the carpet and everything looks nice. Okay guys, we got the room cut in, now it's time to roll. So I've got my cut pot over here with my brush in it, and it's I'm going to use that again on the second coat. So I've got a wet rag here. I'm going to keep that over the top, kind of seal that off with that moist rag, and then I'll keep that nice and wet until I'm ready to use it again. So there's a couple different things that we could use. I've got a 9-inch roller can here from Purdy. Got liners in it. That's one option. I'm going to opt for the old school 5-gallon bucket with a roller grid. At lunch I did go get me a liner for this 5-gallon bucket to make cleanup easy at the end. Got my grid right in here. My package of 9-inch rollers. There's a 9 set up right there. Take the paint. Open that up. Pour it out of the way. Pour it up in the 5. Okay, here's a very important part of rolling. When you buy a brand new roller cover, they have loose lint on them. So if you dump that straight into the paint, that's going to get lint all up in your new paint. So what we do is we wrap these things with some tape, like so. Squeeze them up with our hands a little bit, pick up all that lint. Pull all that off. And then we go ahead and get this thing on the roller. One extra measure that I do is I take my roll of tape, stick it to the floor, put my foot on it, pull it up like this, And then I roll this roller cover up and down on it several times. Pay special close to these edges of it, the ends, because that fur tends to kind of collect and ball up right there. But there you go, that's a roller cover that's ready to be applied to paint. Okay, before rolling, one thing I want to point out, make sure you're masking any surfaces that you're going to be rolling over the top of. A lot of times we'll have a masker with brown paper on it and tape. Today I've got this plastic on a roll right here. So I'm just going to bring this out a little bit. Cut this right here. Lay this out right here on this, tape it down to the edge of the counter. And there we go. And then we can unfold this plastic a little bit here to give us a little bit more space. Now that's masked off nice, and we can roll these areas right here and we don't have to worry about splattering. This also works great for the tops of toilets or really anything that you're rolling over the top of. Another essential tool is a weenie roller. These are awesome for getting into hard to reach spaces that you can't get your 9 or your 18 or even your brush into. So for example, behind the stove here, behind the fridge here, we're gonna roll this back far enough that you can't see the old paint. And that's really easy to do with this weenie roller. And it allows us to get way back up in here behind the stove as well. So this is a good little tool for all types of things. Okay, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna get our roller cover saturated with paint. What's very important is we're not dunking this down into the paint. We don't wanna get paint all over this metal part. It's gonna be dripping and making a mess everywhere. So we're kind of careful with how we do that. So we bring it down in here, we dump it about halfway, roll it over about halfway. Do that several times. And then we're gonna roll it off on this. We need to get the roller cover really good and saturated. So I'm gonna dunk it again. Angle a little bit, kind of pull some of it off those corners. Now I'm ready to get my roll on. All right, so on a wall like this, I'm pretty much gonna start in the middle, and your goal is just to get it covered with paint fairly evenly. And once you get the whole wall rolled out and you got paint on the whole wall, then you can come back and do your back rolling, get everything smoothed out and pretty. So we're gonna do a little dunk here. This is a typical small wall where you're gonna have a lot of stuff that you're kind of rolling around. And also realize the first few dips of paint, as you can kind of see here, your roller cover is gonna be really dry. So you're gonna have to dip, multiple times to kind of get it saturated to where it's working well. So I'm not worried a whole lot about it looking perfect. I do want it smooth. I don't want to leave roller lines or drips or things like that. And I'm just trying to get the paint on the wall right now, and then I'll come back and worry about back rolling in a minute. And what's really good is, even though your cut-in person is cutting around all these outlets for you, make your job a little bit easier. See those drips there? See this splatter, guys? That's why we keep this tarp pushed up nice and tight. I don't care how good you are at rolling, you're gonna have splatter. So make sure that your tarp doesn't creep back away from the wall, letting the floor be exposed, allowing for sprinkles. That's a big, big no-no. This is a good example of roller lines. Just smooth those out real quick. Notice how I roll up really close to the outlets and switches. What we don't want is brush marks around them and then stipple everywhere else, because that'll show. So we try to roll really tight to everything. saturated a little bit better. So it's going a little bit further, moving a little bit better for me. One last dip. Oop. Keep that torque pushed up. I should have this wall covered. And I will back roll everything. Okay, now that I got paint on the wall, I'm going to begin my back roll. You want to roll as tight to the ceiling as you can. You want to roll as tight to the casing as you can. Okay, now I feel like I got it pretty even. I'm just going to do one more quick back roll. Make sure my stipple is all good. Always start this high, push up, bring it down. This final roll is very, very low pressure. You're just trying to make the stipple look nice and even. So as you can see, wall's evenly coated. It's got a nice even stipple on it. Looks pretty good for a first coat. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit more demonstration on how to roll a larger wall. And I also want to mention, when you're rolling, your goal is to roll tight as you can to the ceiling. Roll as tight as you can to cabinets, surfaces. The less area of cut-in that's left, the better. Because then you have nice even stipple up to really close to the surfaces, so everything just looks more consistent. Another thing that's really important to note is when you're dealing with a higher sheened paint, like an eggshell, satin, or a semi-gloss finish, it's very important that you cut a wall in and then immediately roll the wall while your cut-in is still wet. Better yet, have somebody rolling directly behind you as you cut in, so that the roll and the cut will dry at the same time. Because higher sheen paint tends to flash and hat band. So if your cut in dries and then you come back and roll over it and then that dries separately, you can often basically see that stripe around there. So, you know, with flats and mats, you can cut the wall in, let it dry, roll the wall out, it's gonna look fine. But when you start getting into satins, eggshells, semi-glosses, it's really important. Not so much on the first coat. On the first coat, it doesn't really matter, but on the final coat, it's really important to cut a wall in and then roll a wall out immediately after while everything's wet. So everything, and it's even more so important to roll as tight to everything as you can when you're dealing with higher sheens. You want to roll as tight as you can to outlets, vents, casings, ceiling, so that you're leaving a small amount of hat band as possible. Show you how to paint above these soffits right here, these small areas. And get your roller loaded up. And we're just going to do this deal right here. Get it all coated. Okay, now that I got it all coated, I'm gonna just back roll it carefully. There you go. That's how you do above soffits or above doors or any kind of smaller areas. That's how you do those. So in doing this project with my daughter, ran into a couple of no-nos I just wanted to point out. You never, when putting samples on, she went around with a pen and did her little sample names, you know, to keep track of which colors were what. But ink is really bad. This is 2 coats. It's still bleeding back through. We're gonna have to get some stain blocking primer to put on those to hide it on the finished coat. Another thing that she did is, I don't know if you can see from the camera, but all the spots where she went around and put the samples on, she applied it too heavy and left heavy brush strokes in it. So that also is showing back through. So just make sure when you put your sample colors on, you treat them like a finished coat. You gotta feather them out nicely, lay them down nicely so they don't stick out when you put your paint on. All right, we got first coat of paint on. We got our ceiling fans on, so everything could be, that'll help accelerate the drying process. Now is the point in time when you just walk around, you look at everything, see if there's any holes, gouges, dings, or whatever that you missed. We got a couple holes right here that we saw while we were putting the first coat on. Like when you're applying your first coat of paint, look for anything that you missed and make a note of it in your mind. Or you can mark it with a piece of blue tape so that after you're done getting that first coat on, you can go back and fix those areas. All right, so we got the full first coat on. We've gone in between, fixed any kind of stuff in between coats that we didn't like. And now it's time for finish coats. One thing I want to point out once again is make sure you have tarps underneath you wherever you're rolling and cutting. Make sure you have your tarps pushed up against the baseboard so that there's no gaps between the tarp and the wall, or you'll get splatters on the floor. I reiterate this over and over again because I've seen it happen over and over again, and we've spent, I don't even know how many hours cleaning speckles off floors because people weren't mindful of their tarps. It's the end of the day. We're tired. We've been working all day, we've been sweating all day. We just want to get this paint job knocked out so that we can go home, but we can't become complacent with things like that, with safety and with site prep. So it ends up causing more work at the end, and then you end up staying later because you have to do a bunch of cleanup. So make sure you keep your tarps underneath you. Second coat is usually much faster than first coat. All the little nooks and crannies and stuff are cut in. Your wall's got a fresh coat on it, so it's sealed and your paint glides faster, farther, and usually you can rock and roll pretty good on finished coat, and it goes quite a bit faster than the first coat does. So we're about ready to get started. Let's go. All right, we got the finished coat put on. We cut and roll the final coat on everything. It looks really good. We have our fans on. We're allowing everything to dry down. So now it's time to pull tape, clean up, and put all the furniture back together. So, but before you pull tape, what you want to make sure is that you walk around the job, make sure that everything looks good, make sure no walls need to be re-rolled. It sucks to pull all your tape and get everything cleaned up and then notice maybe a couple walls that need to get redone or something, and you have to tape everything off again. So give it all a good inspection, which we've already done. And you're also looking for any paint spots on the floor, like right here. You get a wet rag, those wipe right up. So you might have got a little drip here or there, so look for that, and any touch-ups that you may do. And once you've decided that everything looks good and it's finished, it's time to pull tape. All right, we're getting ready to pull tape. You'll remember these were the casing that we taped off earlier, so let's see what our lines look like. Not too shabby. So here was the spot on the wall where we cut one color to another, and we decided to tape that off. The old line was pretty sketchy. All in all, that come out pretty good. A couple tiny little blowouts, but as you step back and look at that line, that's a nice, clean, sharp, professional line there. All right, you remember earlier we had what we've been calling the goulash corner on the side of the cabinet that looked really bad. So we did some creative taping there, try to straighten things out. We're about to pull tape and see if all of that came out the way we hoped it did. Okay, that's a major improvement. Now, you remember how horrible these corners looked, how gross they were. See how much cleaner they are? Now, a person could get up in here. I need to get my putty rag and a wet knife and kind of clean this little blowout out. So you could tidy this up with a wet rag wrapped around your putty knife, and I'll show you guys how to do that. So inevitably, sometimes when you tape stuff off, paint will seep behind. We made big improvements on the way this looked on the side of the cabinet, but we did have a little bit of a blowout up here where the tape wasn't sealed up good enough, so I'm gonna show you to fix that. You need a wet rag, fairly moist but not dripping. You take your 5-in-1 or a putty knife, wrap it around that edge there. So you got kind of a wet edge. And you come in and you just work it like that. Really tough to get because there's a crevice there. But if you stick with it and you catch it before it's dry, you can fix that. So, again guys, this is a college apartment. It's had a million paint jobs, a million bad paint jobs. So this isn't something that's gonna look perfect or something that I expect to see in a $700,000 home. But for what we were looking at earlier, this is a huge improvement, and that's what a good professional tape job can do for you. So here's just another tape pull so you guys can see what these lines look like when they're taped off properly. Nice and straight, nice and clean. No blowouts, crisp lines. All right guys, that's it. Job's complete. We got our finished coats on. Fans are running, everything's drying. We put our switch plates back on. We put our HVAC grills back on. We've pulled our tape. We've checked the floors for any speckles or spatters, for any touch-ups, and everything's done. It looks fabulous. Furniture's put back, tools are cleaned, everything's loaded, and that's a wrap. That's interior painting 101.